Hi, I'm Dan Bricklin. This is an advanced video that shows how custom keypads are constructed for the TabletForm sample app version 1. This is not necessarily the way that you would do all of your keypads or editors, but it shows how when we had a specification that was designed to be it could have been built natively. In other words, we want to make it as good as possible, following a specification that did not assume that we were using HTML5 or anything, just saying, this is what I want it to be like. And we want to be able to craft it to look exactly the way the designer wanted it and be able to have it behave the way that the UI designer wanted it to behave. This shows you how we implemented that. The other thing is this was actually implemented as some of the genies were being built that learned from this. So it uses some things that could be automated and will be automated in the future, but it shows you how this actually was done. Now, if you look at the sample app, you know that this part is a normal input control. And this is, if I was on a real tablet instead of the simulator, you know that the keyboard would have come up. I would have been able to type on that keyboard, and as I type on that keyboard, characters would go in, and backspace works, and if I press and hold or tap at the right point, I can change the insertion point and drag it along or something, which is kind of cumbersome to do. But those are the things that the normal input control does. But it brings up a keyboard that you don't have that much control of exactly what it looks like or where it appears. And the designer said, well, we really want to have a keypad that looks like this. And for the VIN, which is only, and for the license plate, which are only alphabetic and numeric, we'd like a keyboard that doesn't have shifting. And has some other keys to be able to do exactly what we wanted. So we wanted to implement these. The goal was to build something that would feel very much like a native keyboard, but be able to be implemented using HTML5 and be something that you could modify just by modifying some templates, and be able to have many of them, as you see here, where we have many different uses of the same keyboard, where it's shown, we have a separate showing at the top of the where the text is, where it shows the current value as you're typing in, and the ability to put in stuff like this, but be able to have use it in multiple places, use the same thing at the top with keyboards that pop up elsewhere. So we're going to show how this is constructed and how you can make some modifications to it. The important thing to understand is that, to start with, is that this is the keypad. We'll call this the keypad, and on the bottom we have the larger keypad. And this is a type-in line over here. This is the part where it echoes what you're typing here, but also lets you tap on it to be able to set an insertion point if you want, as if it was a regular input control. This is not a regular input control, and we'll show you how this is put together. This editor sits on top of the screen. This part here, the type-in line, is in a panel at the top, and this is an overlay on top of this whole area that overlays this part of the screen, the big one on the bottom part of the screen. Let's start by looking at the controls that make up this component. So we have comments throughout, and you can always click here to actually see what the comments are. So we go and look at the editor set. We see there's one editor set, and here is the number keypad editor, and it has in it what's called a view box, and the button for closing it, and that is what's overlaid in the upper right part of the screen. when you're editing. But there also is down here the type in line, okay? And the type in line is another view box, and it sits down there in that first panel card that is at the top where most of the editor information, the help information, etc., is shown in the next and previous buttons, etc. Here you can see the next and previous buttons, and this is horizontally centered. In the middle of it is where the title is and the type in line. So I think the first thing we should do is we should look at the type in line, and later on we'll look at the big keypad that you can look at, and the keypad, the smaller keypad, the number pad view box that we'll look at later to show how it works. But to understand it, you really have to understand about this part that shows up. So this is a view box. A view box is one of the components that the form view is built from, and the view box property builder is basically a subset of the form builder. And you should look at the definitions that you'll find elsewhere, the videos that explain the view box. But we'll go through this, and you don't have to know them to be able to follow here. The view box has a data source. In this case, it's just static JSON, and it has a value and a position. The value is the text that's displayed that you see there, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the position is where that insertion cursor shows up. This just is for to help you when you're creating it, but this is actually set when the editor is given a value. There's one item, and we'll get back to this later, but this basically is how we handle the fact that you can tap on one of the numbers and be able to set the insertion point. What it is that the way that a view box works is that there's either a Genie or a freeform editor. We're using a freeform editor, and the freeform editor is using the templating, the Alpha Anywhere templating facility, to be able to output a div. This is an HTML div for each of the character positions that you saw on the screen. And the way it does that is that it has a div for the whole thing called a type in group, and then we'll ignore this div first, but these divs come one right after another, and this is for repeating within the templating language. It starts here and repeats over and over again for all of the chars. But chars is actually set by calling this function, expand chars. Expand chars returns an array, and then it goes through that array looking for an extra value and a char value. For each char value, you'll see over here, there's a div that's an item, and it then outputs the char inside that div. And if it's empty, then it does something a little different. These divs over here just put a space before and a space after the whole thing. Now, why is this all in one line? It's all, basically on one line with some carriage returns in the middle of the tags. This is so there's no extra spaces in here, so that everything is nice and tight together. The key to all of this is the CSS. And the CSS says that if you have a type-in group, and this is a type-in group, and inside the type-in group you have a div, and that's what we have, then display each of those divs as an inline block. That means it's treated as if it was like a character or an image. One will be right after another in line, word wrapping if necessary. Within each div, the text is centered, And with inline block, you can do a vertical align middle to make it vertically aligned middle, so the number's in the middle, and that's the size. We use a monospace font, and here are the margin 0, and there's a transparent 2-pixel border on either side. Those may be changed if the class of the div is check item caret right or caret left. It will change the appropriate border to be a color, to be a blue color. And that's used to be able to get that effect, but we'll see how that happens. But let's show this a little better. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and edit this, and I'm going to make the margin, override the margin, and I'll make override the margin, let's say it was 6 pixels, and I'll make the background color, let's make the background color FCA, okay, which is kind of a reddish pink or something. And let's now do a preview. And here you can see how there are separate divs for each of the characters. And here's that space before. Here's each of them, and you can actually tap on them and it gets that set. This one, clicking on doesn't do anything, but it does show the comma that was added. And if you had done the telephone number, then the telephone number, you see, automatically adds the minus sign. And we'll look and learn how that happens a little later. Okay, so that gives you an idea about what this is. Let's go look a little more at it. So, so the layout says that do this expand chars. That basically breaks up the value into individual items in a list, which gives me the char, and it also gives me the extra that gets put before it, so that if there is extra, the minus or the comma, that would be there. So how do we actually create that? Well, the data source, remember, has a value and a position. If we look at the JavaScript, expand chars, which is, if you look at how the templating works, you'll understand about how it's given an array, which is the values, temp and root, and you return the actual array that you want to use. So what we do here is we take the value, which was that value that is put in the JSON, that's the data source. We do a split on nothing. That breaks it up into separate characters, and you end up in an array of characters, of strings of 1 character each. We then have a return value, which is an array, and we go through each of these and create an object with the char of whatever that char was. So if the value was 1, 2, 3, 4, you'd see 1, 2. There'd be the first one, 0 would be 1, second one would be 2, then 3, and then 4 as characters, and there'd be nothing for the extra. If there is a setting in the root for thousands, not just for value but for thousands, then that character is set every 3, starting from the end, and that's how we put in the commas. Or you could make it a different character if you don't use commas, your separator. There's also this picture value. This really is just a list of characters to insert between each particular position if there's text on either side. What you do first is the first character of the picture is the character that it then splits all the other characters with, because we don't know what character you're going to use inside. And then it gets rid of the first character and breaks apart based on that first character. So it could be, let's say, a slash, and then you would use slashes as the first, and then use slashes to separate each of the pieces. These then each become what extra is added. They may normally be nothing, but you know, on the telephone number, there's some minuses or hyphens that are put at the right place for a U.S. telephone number. But then the results, so we can ignore this if you want, but the return value returns this array of chars and extras. Going back here, we see that that array now is used if there's extra, then it adds a div with extra in it, but no item setting on it. If there's no extra, then there's nothing extra put in between. And then there is an A5 item of char position, char pos, and then it has the count. So this would be 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. And that would have in it, and then that if the count is equal to the position that was in that field, then that's where the cursor position is. Then use the class of having a caret on the right. If the position is -1, namely before everything, and the count is 0, you're on the first character, then use caret left, which these have to be used because the CSS uses border left and border right to be able to put the pseudo caret on the screen. So this is, you know, this is carefully crafted HTML and CSS, but it's, you know, you can basically just copy this and then a caret position of the length, the number of characters, and about where you if you're on it, tells you where the character position is, -1 for the beginning. So let's look at items. If you happen, since these are all char pos, if you positions, if you tap on them, then what happens is it gets the position, which was the value that each one has in it, and the value is greater than the length. Then it's the last one. So basically, it makes sure that it doesn't go too far. It basically takes that number, and that's the position. But if for any reason it's too far, it makes sure that it's not past this. And then it refreshes this view box so that you can see the updated value. Okay. So now, that's how this displays values, but how does it change it? This also comes with this function called kbd key, kbd_key, keyboard key. And this processes a keyboard press. What you do is you call this function, you give it the name of this control, the particular view box that's the type in line, and then you give it an operation that you want to do, like add a character, do a backspace, clear the whole thing, move the cursor left or right. And then if there is a value to be given, give it a v, the value of the string to be added. So all this does is it gets the control, which is, in this case, is this particular view box, but this is a standalone routine that can be used for many different type in lines. And it then does looks at the operation you've given. If it adds it, then if there is a max characters, and if it's greater than that, you can't type more than max characters. And this uses the data for the control. The control has data, and so as you'll see how that's set later. And then other than that, it just adds the value in, or splices it in the middle if the position isn't at the end of the line. Backspace, if it's at the, it depends on whether it's at the beginning of the line or not, and does the right thing to delete just the right character. Either, in this case, it's not at the very end, so it It takes a substring that's one less than where the character position, and adds the rest at the end, makes it smaller. This is the thing that handles the delete off the end. This just sets the value to 0 and the character position to -1, moves the cursor to the left, moves the cursor to the right, and then refreshes what you see on the screen, and then does an echo if you're if you've set the My Data editor setting. Then it will do so that it has an editor set. It assumes you've done that, and it takes that editor set and it echoes it so that it would show up in the field of the form view. Okay, so this is the thing that you need to call to let the keyboard be able to communicate with the type in line. So if so now let us take a look at, let's just look at it once more running. So now we sort of understand this a little more, hopefully. We still have it modified to look a little different. So now you see how the value in this case is 2, 3, 4, 6. That's the value, but notice it has added the extra character here. Each of these are here, and you can see it setting the appropriate values. Okay, and this doing its stuff. Now let's take a look at how the keyboard is done. So let's look at the keypad. So this is a view box, and the view box is a container. You can see there is the button container, and then in the button container there are many buttons. And now buttons are used instead of using the divs with the inline display, inline block CSS to make one after another. In this case, this was done using buttons which are one right after another, just like characters. This has been used in other examples, and I basically copied it here. The CSS says that the button container is aligned center. It has some padding on the top, and then for each button inside they have a little bit of a margin around it, and they have a border radius of 4. This gets rid of the standard border and stuff from a button, so it doesn't look like a regular button, but it looks like one that we've crafted especially here. It's 44 px high, 66 wide, which is a good size for tapping. Has no outline. By default there's an outline on buttons. It's the text is white, the font size is 20, bold and centered. If the button happens to be have a class of blue, then it's that blue color, and if it's red, it's that red color. And while your finger is on it, pushing down on it, while it's active, we make it a light gray so that you can see when you're tapping on it. So if we look at this, you see that this is not a repeating. This just has a button that's of an item, A5 item that is button with a value of 1. It then has in it, the button has the text 1, and then here is a button with the text 2, the button with the text 3, and then afterwards a carriage return, a break basically to a BR to do the next line. And here's the 789, here's the all clear. It has the characters AC on the button, but instead of the item, instead of having this, has clear as the, instead of being item button, it's item clear, and there's no value. And it has a class blue because that one is blue, and this one is red, and it is backspace. Instead of characters in here, we have SVG. We can show this in a separate video about how to be able to use SVG, which is basically line. This is draw a line from here to here to here to here to here, to be able to draw, in this case, the backspace arrow. and that's the end of it. So basically, this is just a straight showing these buttons. But when you press on a normal button, what does it do? It does KBD key. It says it looks for the data for this in the data source. It looks for control, which would be the name of the thing that the text view, the text box where, sorry, the view box where the you want to actually modify the value and edit it. Here you're doing an add, and you're taking that value and you're just adding that character, and it can be any character you want that had been the value. It picks up this value over here, which could be whatever you wanted, and button just adds it to the text. Clear just does the clear command, calling the same thing. Backspace does backspace, and insert is an old one that we're currently not using. That was for use to be able to insert space in the middle. The data source has control and form. Control is needed here, as you see. It's used to know which control to be able to give to the KBD key, that command. Form is used if we had an item, for example, to go to the next field, which we're not doing in this case, but I'll show you in another case we do use it. So that's it. Okay, so now let's see how is that used. Well, let me just go back here first. So what you see is that here's a key, here's a key, here's a key. When I press this, it's calling, setting the add to do that, the backspace or the all clear. And notice when I press down, it turns gray. So that's how this is constructed. Let's see how it's filled out. So for the number pad editor, we get the type in line, okay, which is where we want this to show up. And we create this data object. There's the value, make sure that it's text. The max characters, we can pick that up off of the settings. So this is something that can be set in the form and the custom settings for that particular field. There's the position. It starts at the end by default is what we have it here to be at the end. We define chars, which will eventually be filled in automatically with that function that you saw. And we're setting the thousands to the setting thousands, which can pick it up from there in the picture. The same thing here, and this tells you how it works. We then populate the view box, which is the type in line, give this data to it, and then we take the number pad view box, which, so this is populating that line that's in the middle, but this then takes the keypad that you see, the number pad, and populates it with control of type in line, so it will be able to connect to type in line to be able to do the add, etc. So there we get to see, we can see it again. How this was set up to now knows how to connect to that. And the same thing's over here, except this has a different keypad. The keypad's on the bottom, but it works the same way. So if we look over here at the big keypad, okay, in the big keypad, it sets it up and it has it uses the same type in line, but it uses the big keypad view box, and it populates that with, it tells it the control, the same as before, but it also sets form, telling it from settings the form, and the form is used by the next button, and we'll look at that in a second. And the show editor gets a pointer to the type-in container and just shows that. And then it also does the big keypad, and this is for hiding and showing it. There's a button for hiding and showing it, and this is the big keypad itself, the panel overlay for it. It's a separate panel overlay, and that's down here, and we can look at this, which is just another view box. It has a data source just like before, control and form. It has items. In this case, it has button just as before. KBD key, control, do an add for each of the keys that might be there. Clear, backspace, but it also has a left and a right, which will move the cursor back and forth. And finally, next field. And what next field does is it picks up the form that you've given it and does a form view navigate of next. So this is how it's able to do that. If we go look at the CSS, the CSS is very similar, except that the sizes are a little different of the keys for the keyboard at the bottom. But it also has the ability to have wider buttons and narrower buttons and spacers that are transparent. Okay, the reason for that is that the way this is laid out, remember, it's all centered within the container, and this has a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across, so there's a button, and then the backspace key, and then you see there's Q, W, E, R, T, Y goes across. And you can see all the buttons. And this is a wide one that's blue, and it's an item of next field. So this is just set up it's similar to the other one, but it's laid out a little differently. And let's make a change to this one. I'm going to take I'm going to take just one of these. Let's take one of these, okay? And we'll take this one and copy it. And we'll put it at the beginning up here and make that on a separate line. And let's say that I wanted to have a minus. I want to be able to add some other keys to it, right? And let's add an open parenthesis and a closed parenthesis, okay? So what I've just done is, okay, so I've added some more of these buttons, and they will lay out, they'll be centered appropriately. If I go and look at working preview, oh, I forgot a character. There we go. And same thing over here. And same thing over here. Did I get them all? Yes, I hope. And here we have these extra ones, and if I push them, look at that, it does it. And notice it's working on the same type-in line as before. Okay, now when we did this, this is centered, but we could have made them, if necessary, offset. We could have had different size, we could have had different colors. That's why if you look in the CSS here, we have wide buttons and colors and spacers, and you could put in, as you can see over here, there's some spacers put in to make it center just the right amount and to be exactly the way that you want it to look like a keyboard, or just to work right. Now, let's say what you'd like to do is to have a home button. So let's say that we want to add a new item here. We have left and right, you know, which just do this to a keyboard. So let's copy that and let's add a new item, and we'll call this item home, and say that it will call it with the command home. Okay, and we'll go to here, and let's go here and put in a button, and it's an A5 item, home, class, let's say, is blue. We don't need the A5 value. So here's how you can see how the colors were put in, like class blue over there. And let's call this, say, home /button. Okay, so this adds another button that uses the item code for home. Okay, and now we run that. Now the home button. Of course, pushing home isn't going to do anything because we haven't hooked it up to anything. So now what we have to do is we have to go over to the type in line, and type in line, as you might remember, has JavaScript, and there is JavaScript here for all the different commands here. So let's add a new case home, and we'll set the cdata.position. That brings it to the beginning, and then break. Okay. So now we go down, we type 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see it's over there. Push the home button. And now it's at the beginning. So we were able to modify it. So you've seen how to be able to change the look of the characters up here. In this case, we changed the background and some spacing between it. We've been able to add new keys. We've been able to add new functionality. This gives you an idea of some of the power that you have by just modifying this a little bit, where you can have your HTML be exactly what you want, and you can even get some of that from a designer, which in this case I did. A designer gave me the particular CSS, etc., to get this look, the colors and whatever, and have complete control over it. Now, the way that this is done using the particular way in which we call the editors, the way in which the arguments are passed to it, using the settings, the way that you've seen the settings. Those things are one way of doing it. It's not necessarily the only way to do it. Here, remember, we set this up and it calls it appropriately with the right settings. We have, if you look at the comments on here, you'll see about how the editors set up certain information at the beginnings of the editor set, where it always sets things certain ways. This is just one way of doing it. It's not the only way or necessarily the best way, but it's a way that works, and this is a working piece of code that you can modify, and you can try out different keyboard layouts, etc., to be able to get your own simulated keys. And in some cases, you might be able to make it much easier to be able to do very interesting input without lots of shifts and typing, and it can be much faster, especially for a keypad that is used a lot. You could make the buttons bigger than normal if you have fewer keys, to make them easier to hit if, for example, the person using it is standing up. So hopefully this was helpful, showing you some of the flexibility that's built into the sample app, and it's editors that you can copy out of here and use elsewhere once you understand how they work. Thank you very much.